Hey, welcome to True-Moto-Resto, and today we're going to rebuild the carburetors, clean them, and put them all back together. This is for the ZX7. Okay, carburetor rebuild day. So I bought a set of O-rings and seals and whatnot from a company in Thailand called Light Tech. All the kits, the seal kits, O-ring kits that I bought from them have always been excellent, really good quality, good for ethanol-based fuels and all that kind of good stuff. So I'm going to use them again. And so what I do, you may have seen it before in my videos, is I have 2 trays for each carburetor. Everything's numbered 1 to 4. And basically what I do is I'll keep, say, the top end components in this tray, and I'll keep the float bowl components in this tray. And then I'll have a couple of other trays, usually a larger one and a spare for things like the bars that hold everything together, and hoses and all of that kind of stuff. That way I can keep it all straight as far as what goes where. The other thing I'll do is I'll use my trusty notepad. I will record the order that I take things apart, as much as I've done sets of carburetors before. For the extra few minutes it takes just to record everything, it's worth it just to not get things all confused and buggered up in the process. The other thing I will say is make sure that you have a set of JIS screwdrivers. That's what these are. 90% of the time when you look at a set of carbs off a Japanese bike, you will find screws that are kind of bitched up. This isn't too bad. This is I think one of the only screws on here that's somebody's taken off. You can see that they're slightly galled, and usually that's a result of somebody using a Phillips screwdriver. When they are not Phillips screws, they are JIS, Japanese Industrial Standard screws. And the difference being is a Phillips screwdriver will be a little bit more pointy. It'll kind of come up to where my fingernail is there. So what I would recommend, if you don't have a set of JIS screwdrivers, you take a Phillips screwdriver and you just touch it a couple of times lightly against your grinder and take the tip off, and that will allow it to seat more deeply in the screw, and then it won't cam out as easy and gall the head of the screw off. So the other thing I like to do with these things when you don't know how long they've been together and if they've ever been apart is I will take all this sort of stuff apart with an impact driver, just because screws in aluminum and the opportunity for galvanic corrosion, it does make it difficult to get them out. So you might as well use an impact. You do have to be careful, of course. You don't want to break anything, but that's what I typically do. The other thing to be aware of is when you lay the carburetors out, so this is carburetor 1, 2, 3, and 4. At some point in the process, you will have to turn this stuff over, no doubt, and start taking things apart. So now then you got to remember that this is now 4, 3, 2, and 1, and you don't want to get the parts mixed up. Easily done. It's very easy to mix things up, so just kind of keep that in mind. And or if you've got, the carburetors upside down. So it's also not a bad idea is to just ascribe a number. So number 4, number 3 on the bowl, so you know what goes where. On some carburetor sets, you cannot mix those things up. They must go back in the right place. Some it doesn't matter, some it does. Similarly with the screws. When you take these things apart, like on these carburetors, I don't think it's going to matter. These screws are going to be all the same. On some of the Honda V4 engines, for instance, they are not the same. And you can actually put a screw in that's slightly too long and it will end up cracking like a fuel tube on a Honda V4. So you've got to be careful. Some of the Honda V4s, it doesn't do that. Other ones, it does. So you just have to be careful and cautious and know what came out of where. And if you're not sure, make notes. Like I'm going to make notes, take pictures. I take tons and tons of pictures, and that way it just kind of helps to ensure that everything goes back the way that it should. So let's get on with it. Just mark them left and right, and that stuff will just wipe right off with acetone. Again, it's just, if you can make a note on there, why wouldn't you? So now we should be able to start to separate these guys. So we just got to be careful that I don't lose any of the springs that go in between here. It's easily done. There we go. So we have carburetors went, but yeah, it's important to keep an eye on that stuff. Start to flip these things back this way now. Okay. So here's where you know, again, I need to be careful here that I don't lose screws and springs and whatnot. So the spring here that kind of goes between this plate and this one, it's still sticking there, so you kind of know where that goes. There's a spring here, which is easy to lose. Another spring there that's easy to lose. This spring popped right out, so unless you took pictures or you know where it goes, I mean, you're going to be wondering, right? So again, springs everywhere, so just take note of where everything's at. So again, what I'm doing here is on the disassembly, all of these parts here, these two springs, this venting tee and this fuel tee, are going in one bag because they all fit between carbs 1 and 2. All these parts are going in a separate bag and they fit between carbs 3 and 4. Are they all the same? Yes, they are, but it's just easy to keep everything separate and distinct. And then I'll have a separate bag when I put that little spring for the stuff that goes between these two, like the the fuel tee, the main fuel tee that I already removed there will go in that bag also. Well, I guess we'll take apart the top end of each of these. Holy cow. I don't think these have ever been apart. Oh, you bugger. Yeah, these things have been put together at some point by Arnold Schwarzenegger. And even these float ball screws are crazy tight. All right, so I've taken these are air screws or fuel screws out. Now what I got to try to do now is get the there's a little washer in here that has to come out. there's a little washer, and then there's also a little O-ring. Get the O-ring out of here as well. There it is. So I'm going to take those out for all 4 of the carbs. Okay, I will say that despite my best efforts and the caution that I try to take with screw removal on carburetors, whoever put these together last time must have been closely related to the Caveman or Arnold Schwarzenegger, because the screws were in so tight. I've never ever had this amount of problems trying to get screws out, but this one was the bane of my existence. It was in there incredibly tight. I had to resort to using a Dremel and vice grips and God knows what else to get it out, so I have to put a new screw in for that. And I will also say that at this point, all the top cap screws have given me grief. I've only been able to get 3 of those loose. The rest of them are just in there like I don't know what. And they've got a very wide flange or collar on the top. You can see there, and that gives you a lot. It gives the thing a lot of purchase on that plastic, so it's really hard to budge. So this screw was already starting to get a little bit bitched. Alright, so I finally got the carburetor stripped down here for the most part. I still have to take the pilot jet out, but I got this top cap off finally. And what I did was, the gentleman who is doing the wheels, the tires and the wheels on my bike, I was telling him this morning when I was dropping off the wheels and tires to get changed over that I was having a high degree of difficulty getting those screws out, and he said, hey, have you tried to use some valve grinding paste on the tip of your screwdriver? He said sometimes it's just enough to get a bit of extra grip. And so I tried it, and so far that's working. I've just got 3 more to go now. We'll see if I can get it done. Used to retain the float shaft. It's a different setup than I've ever seen before, but first time for everything. It looks like there's also a screw used to hold the seat in there as well. Okay, let's see if we can get this last set of screws out of here. Fingers crossed. This one. And I gotta tell you, this is taking every ounce of strength that I have to push and turn on these screws. That's how tight they're in there. Yeah, but we got them. You really do have to find a way to get them out. So yeah, you never ever want to use carb cleaner with these rubber diaphragms in. It'll just turn them to just a sticky, gooey mess, and you really make a mess of it. So don't do that. what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to clean the outside of these carb bodies off a little bit with some brake clean. I'm not going to go too crazy. They're fairly clean, but truth be told, I probably should have done the external cleaning before I took them apart, but I kind of got a couple of steps ahead of myself there and forgot. So I'm just going to spray these off a little bit, just that way when I put them in the ultrasonic cleaner, there's just a lower chance of any bits of dirt getting inside the carburetor. So I'm just going to clean these guys off. Okay, so I'm going to take the choke assemblies out of here, because I want to be able to get in and clean all of the various orifices out. So basically with the choke assembly, there's a little rubber cover there. I have new ones of those to go on, and then 12mm kind of hex type of fitting here, which is almost impossible to get the wrench in there. So once you get it started with the wrench, it's, as long as you're careful, you can get them out with some needle nose pliers, I guess, which is what I am doing here. And then when it comes out, it's basically the choke enrichment circuit plunger. Okay, I'm just going to hit this with brake cleaner before I get too far into the process here. I just like to soak everything in this stuff, just because, in my opinion, I just like to know that all the passageways are as clear as they can be, and if I see the stuff, you know, spraying one place and coming out of another, then it helps me some confidence that everything is getting as clean as it needs to be. All right, so here's the ultrasonic cleaner, and obviously there's nothing in it at the moment. There's no water or whatnot in here. So I've had this thing for, I don't know, 6 or 8 years. I've used it 60 times maybe, and it's a cheaper Chinese one, I guess. I got it off Amazon, and every year that it keeps on working, I just keep thanking my lucky stars. Some people say they're crap. Maybe they are, but so far, touch wood, everything has been fine with it. Now, what I would recommend with any ultrasonic cleaner is make sure that it is clean and spotless before you start. And the reason for that is, in my experience, and I've made this mistake myself, you know, cleaning multiple sets of carburetors without cleaning out the tank, and then eventually you do 2 or 3 sets of carburetors, and then you clean the tank out and you find something in the bottom, and then you go, oh crap, which set of carburetors did that O-ring come off of? So what I would do is, every time I do a set of carbs, I drain this thing, clean it out, and that way if anything has fallen off one of these carburetor bodies or whatnot, you've got a much better chance of figuring out where it came from and which carburetor set it's off of. The other thing that I use is, this is one of those tea balls. You can put tea in it for loose tea instead of having a tea bag. And if you've got small parts, if you want to, I typically clean my jets just in carb cleaner and use I have a carb cleaning jet cleaning tools. I use that most of the time. But if you've got any real small parts that are going to fall through the holes in the mesh, you can just kind of stick them into this inside this ball and just drop it right in there, and it works pretty good for keeping track of the small stuff. So okay, so here's the concentrated solution that I use in my ultrasonic cleaner. I get this mailed up to me from Bob Chambers Limited in Mississauga, Ontario. It's called 297 Super Solve Concentrate, and it's for all kinds of industrial cleaning solutions. So I put maybe a cupful of that in there, and then I give it a shot of lavender clean pine sol, just because pine sol tends to work pretty good as a cleaner, as well as the fact that it smells great, especially the lavender stuff. You get chilled right out here in the garage with that smell lingering around. So 15 liters of water. It's a 15-liter cleaner. So yeah, it works pretty well for the getting a full set of carbs in there. So there's the pink purple solution. Seems to work pretty well for me. So there's all kinds of people. Some people use simple green. There's all kinds of stuff you can use, I guess. That's just what I prefer. The other thing I would say is I go right ahead and I mark each of the carburetors with this was number 1. I just kind of scribe it onto the carburetor body. This number 2. So that way when you get these things back out of the ultrasonic cleaner, you're not guessing as to which one goes where. Same thing with the float balls. All right, 25 minutes later, excuse me, got the stuff ready to come back out. So I'm gonna lift this stuff out and we'll see how it looks. All right, so everything looks pretty clean, looks good. Tends to do a pretty good job. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the good old airline here and blow out all the passageways. Alright, so here's my new O-rings, and the float bowl gaskets are already sitting in there. These are from Light Tech. So we've got the stuff for the pilots here. Choke grommets. These are for the outer fuel lines, and these are for the center fuel tee, and also for the vent tubes. The new choke grommets are all on, and now these are the old washer and the old O-rings for the fuel screws or the air screws. So these are the new ones. So it basically goes spring, washer, O-ring. We'll do that on all 4. So we'll seat these all the way in, and then we'll back them back out to what they were set to, which was 3 turns. You don't want to crank them down too tight, just till they seat. Right there. So that's half. 1, 1.5, 2, 2.5, 3. So then go ahead. I already put the pilots back in, and the mains going back in here. And get the thing to go the right way. And you don't want to. I don't want to crank on these too tightly because they're just brass. They just need to be snugged down. You don't need to go caveman on this stuff. Okay, so next step is setting the float heights, or checking the float heights. So we'll need to set them if they're wrong. So the first 2 I've checked are fine, and the way that you do that is, it's hard to get it on the video here, but if you look at the needle and the seat there kind of moving in and out in the center of the picture. The float height is correct when the needle just seats right there. You don't want to set it where this little secondary plunger is going down, and you don't want to set it when you can see all the needle. So the needle will compress as it's going in, and then once it stops moving, which is right there, before that plunger starts moving is where you want to check the float height now. And this one, it's pretty much 90 degrees to the support stanchions, but the correct way to check it is using this float gauge, which is set at 13 millimeters, plus or minus 2. So I'm going to put that across the back of the floats right here where my fingers are, my finger, and then I'll just double check it, but this one looks like it's probably okay as well. But that's where you want to check it. All right, so I don't always do this, but in the case of these carburetors, because somebody may have gone caveman on tightening these bowls, like they were wicked tight. I had a real tough time getting these screws out. Same with the top caps. But what I don't want to have happen is to have the bowl bottoming out on the upper case of the carburetor body, and the gasket not sealing, because if for some reason some of these have been bent down through over tightening over the years. So what I've got here on my metal table for my drill press is some 400 sandpaper, emery paper, and I'm just going to scuff the face of this on here, and just to see if there's any high spots, and that will make it seal a little bit better. When you do that, you got to be careful. I had another set that I did on my CBX 750, and on the CBX there's some of these have like a lug on them. It's a raised lug where one of the bolts go through. It's like a locating lug, so you got to be careful. You don't want to be sanding that off, of course. So yeah, that's what I do. And then I got to clean a bit more of the silicone out of there that somebody squirted in. So float bowls are all back on. Have the new gaskets, and so now we'll put the diaphragms and the slides and the caps back on. Okay, next up of reassembly is new O-rings. These are new O-rings. They have to go on the fuel tubes. And then there's a different set of O-rings for the venting tee. The same O-rings of the venting tee goes into the center fuel line. And then, yeah, there's one more of these straight tubes for these O-rings here. So there's 8 of these guys, and then there's 4 of these guys. And then the other thing I'm going to do, once they're assembled, I'm going to just put a little coat of rubber grease on all these fittings, just so they slide in a little bit nicer. And then of course the challenging part of all of this, not that rebuilding carbs can't be challenging enough, getting these getting these springs back in is always an interesting exercise. When you have to, so my plan is to attach the tubes to this carburetor number 1, get everything set up, and then attach carb 2. Similarly, get carbs 3 and 4 joined together, and then once these guys are joined, then I'll put together these two. We'll see how that works out. All right, so got everything joined back together. That went fairly smoothly. So everything is kind of joined back together and operating as it should from that perspective. I've got the connecting bolt back through here, so it's not going to fly apart while I do the next pieces of it. So next I've got to put the choke slider back on, and then the connecting rod or plate, whatever you want to call it, on the bottom side here as well. Everything is back together and working as it should from the basic assembly perspective. So the next step for me is I'm going to connect a fuel line here, and then I'm going to put it on a fuel bottle. Probably won't do that until tomorrow because I've got a couple of things I got to get to now, but I'm going to set it in one of those wash basins down here. And I want to make sure, do two things really. One is to just have it on a fuel feed for, let's say, a full day, maybe even overnight tomorrow, just to make sure that I haven't got any leaks. And then the other thing I'll do is I'll drain the float bowls after and make sure that I've got roughly the same amount of fuel in each of the bowls. Now, depending on how you drain, obviously there's going to be, when you disconnect the fuel lines, there's going to be a little bit of fuel in each of these pipes, but generally speaking, I'm looking for approximately the same amount of fuel out of each of the bowls, and just to make sure nothing's leaking. Hey, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. As I've said before, I'm not a professional mechanic, so if you see anything here that I did wrong in rebuilding the carbs, please feel free to leave comments below. Always good to learn something new. In the meantime, we're heading off tomorrow to pick up the fuel tank, which has been re-cleared, and also I'm going to be picking up the wheels and the tires, so I'm anxious to get the thing back together. Thanks for watching.